What happens when a waiter's arrogance and snap judgment lead to a humiliating moment in front of one of the world's most influential people? Michael Carter's quiet dignity becomes the centerpiece of an unforgettable lesson about appearances, respect, and the power of resilience. How will this encounter reshape lives and challenge biases? Before we dive into this captivating story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales. "Excuse me, sir, this restaurant has a dress code," Bradley sneered, his perfectly coiffed hair barely shifting as he tilted his head toward Michael's shoes. Scuffed, black leather, with frayed laces, they told the story of a man who didn't care to impress the likes of Bradley. "We reserve the right to maintain a certain standard." Michael Carter looked up from his phone, his calm brown eyes meeting Bradley's sharp, judgmental gaze. "Is there a problem?" Michael's voice was steady, unshaken, but his question carried an undercurrent of strength. Bradley's lips curled into a smirk, the kind that made other diners turn their heads to watch the drama unfold. "I'm just saying that we have expectations. Perhaps a place down the street would be more your style." Michael glanced around. The room was everything one would expect from an upscale restaurant in the heart of the city: marble floors, chandeliers that scattered soft light, and patrons wrapped in designer labels. All of it exuded affluence. Yet it was clear he was the only one dressed in a simple blazer and jeans. And those shoes, those were a sticking point for Bradley. "I have a reservation," Michael said calmly, holding out his phone with the confirmation email on display. Bradley didn't even glance at it. "Of course you do." The waiter's tone dripped with condescension as his eyes flitted back to Michael's shoes. "But perhaps next time you'll consider investing in attire that doesn't insult the atmosphere." Michael smiled slightly, the kind of smile that wasn't meant for comfort. It was one that made people question their footing. "I wasn't aware footwear could be offensive." "Sir, I'm just trying to." To what Michael interrupted, his tone sharpening ever so slightly. He rose to his full height, and though he wasn't the tallest man in the room, there was something about the way he stood that commanded attention. "To protect the dignity of a space filled with people who wouldn't notice me otherwise? Or is it just easier to assume I don't belong because of my shoes?" The restaurant seemed to hush. Conversations dropped to murmurs, and Bradley, caught off guard, sputtered for a response. "It's policy," he finally stammered, though there was no conviction in his words. "Policy," Michael echoed, his tone now cold. He adjusted his blazer and sat back down, his calm demeanor unnerving in its certainty. "Well, Bradley, I'd appreciate it if you honored your policy and showed me to my table. Unless, of course, you'd like to escalate this." Bradley's cheeks burned red as a few diners whispered among themselves. An older couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, the woman giving Michael a small, supportive nod while her partner seemed to sink into his chair, uncomfortable with the scene. Before Bradley could respond, the restaurant manager approached, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He was a man who had mastered the art of intervening without picking sides. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice warm but authoritative. "This gentleman doesn't appear to meet our dress code," Bradley began, his voice regaining some of its arrogance. The manager's eyes flicked to Michael's shoes, then to Michael himself. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "I do," Michael said, holding up his phone again. This time, the manager looked. His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't comment. "Of course, Mr. Carter," the manager said smoothly, signaling to Bradley. "Please escort him to his table." Bradley hesitated but eventually muttered, "Right this way." Michael followed, his steps deliberate. As he passed, he caught snippets of whispered conversations. "Who does he think he is? Ridiculous. They'll let anyone in these days." But there were other voices, too. "Good for him. That waiter was out of line. He's got more class than half the people in here." Bradley stopped at a table near the center of the room, placing a menu down with a bit too much force. "Your table," he said flatly before turning on his heel. Michael took his seat, adjusted his jacket, and surveyed the room. He was aware of the stares but remained unbothered, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. There was a quiet confidence in him, a patience that hinted he wasn't here for mere dining. And as Bradley retreated, a storm of emotions flickering across his face, Michael smiled faintly to himself. The evening was just beginning, and if people thought they had him figured out, they were sorely mistaken. Bradley returned to the kitchen, his composure fraying with each step. He slammed the door behind him, drawing the attention of the sous chefs and other waitstaff bustling around him. "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" Bradley muttered, reaching for a water pitcher with an almost theatrical flourish. "Cheap shoes, cheap attitude." "You mean the guy at table 5?" asked Sarah, a junior waitress polishing silverware nearby. "He seems nice enough." Bradley scoffed, pouring water into the pitcher with more force than necessary. "Nice? Sure. But people like him don't belong here. You know the type comes in just to prove a point, probably can't even afford the tip." "Maybe he's waiting for someone," Sarah offered, her tone cautious. She didn't agree with Bradley, but she knew better than to challenge him outright. "I mean, he's carrying himself like he's comfortable. Doesn't seem fazed." "That's the problem," Bradley snapped. "They come in here with their heads held high, like they own the place. And why? Because they think confidence makes up for lack of class." Sarah raised an eyebrow but said nothing, returning to her polishing. Meanwhile, Bradley steeled himself, plastering on his professional smile as he pushed the door back open and walked into the dining area. At the table, Michael checked his watch. He was early, intentionally so. He had wanted to observe the atmosphere, and now he had seen it in full. Judgment, whispers, and a veneer of civility that barely concealed the prejudice lurking beneath. None of it was new to him, but it never failed to amaze him how predictably it played out. Bradley approached, his earlier bravado replaced by a forced politeness. "Can I get you anything to drink while you wait?" Michael glanced at the menu but didn't pick it up. "Just water for now. I'm expecting someone." Bradley nodded curtly and poured water into Michael's glass. His hand trembled slightly, a mix of anger and nerves. As he turned to leave, Michael spoke up. "Busy night." Michael's tone was conversational, but Bradley stiffened as if he'd been challenged. "It's always busy here," Bradley said over his shoulder, trying to sound nonchalant, "especially with our usual clientele." Michael nodded, his expression neutral. "Must be rewarding to work in such a prestigious place." Bradley turned back, the edge creeping back into his smile. "Rewarding, yes, but it requires a certain standard. Not everyone gets it." Michael met his gaze evenly, his calm demeanor unchanged. "And yet you're here serving me." Bradley's lips twitched, and he left without another word, gripping the empty pitcher like a lifeline. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room was palpable. A few tables away, a couple whispered to each other, their glances darting toward Michael. At another table, a businessman in a tailored suit watched the interaction with thinly veiled curiosity. A waiter passed by Michael's table, dropping off a basket of artisan bread. Michael thanked him quietly, ignoring the murmurs around him. He broke off a piece of bread, taking his time, savoring the moment despite the eyes on him. Bradley returned, this time holding a bottle of wine. "Would you like to see the wine list?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "No, thank you. As I said, I'm waiting for someone." Bradley hesitated, then smirked. "You know, sometimes people cancel. It happens." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so?" Bradley shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I've just seen it before. Someone promises a meeting, but when they see the setting, he let the implication hang in the air." Michael set down the bread, his expression unreadable. "You seem very concerned about my evening, Bradley. Are you always this invested in your guests?" Bradley flushed but didn't respond. He turned to leave again, but this time, a woman sitting at the next table called out. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp. "I couldn't help but notice you've been less than accommodating to this gentleman." The restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath. Bradley turned to face the woman, his professional mask slipping. "I assure you, ma'am, I've been nothing but polite." The woman tilted her head, unimpressed. "Polite isn't the same as respectful. Maybe you should consider the difference." Michael smiled faintly but didn't intervene. Bradley muttered something under his breath and walked away, his face burning. As the evening wore on, Michael's patience remained intact, but the room buzzed with anticipation. Every interaction with Bradley became a small spectacle, the diners oscillating between discomfort and fascination. Then, the door opened, and the murmurs turned into audible gasps. Michael looked up, and a broad smile spread across his face. "Elon," he called, rising from his seat as the billionaire strode toward him, casual but commanding in his presence. The room froze as Elon Musk approached Michael, shaking his hand with genuine warmth. "Michael, sorry I'm late. Traffic was brutal." Michael waved it off. "I'm just glad you're here." Bradley stood rooted in place, the wine bottle trembling in his hand. His face drained of color as Elon's voice carried across the room. "Let's get started. I've been looking forward to this." The tables around them erupted in whispers, but Michael and Elon paid no attention. For the first time that evening, Michael truly relaxed, his quiet dignity shining brighter than any chandelier in the room. Michael and Elon sat across from each other, their conversation flowing naturally, as if the events leading up to this moment hadn't happened. The room, however, was far from calm. Whispers cascaded across tables like an audible wave, and phones discreetly captured glimpses of the unexpected duo. Bradley, still clutching the wine bottle, stood by the kitchen doors, frozen in disbelief. "What's Musk doing here with him?" he muttered, his words dripping with disbelief. His co-worker Sarah nudged him from behind, snapping him out of his stupor. "Maybe you should go apologize," she said, her tone firm. "You were way out of line." Bradley's face twisted in defiance. "Why should I? He didn't look like he belonged. How was I supposed to know?" "That's exactly the problem," Sarah cut him off. "You assumed. And now you look like a fool. Fix it." Bradley gritted his teeth, hesitating as he watched Elon gesture animatedly while Michael listened with quiet confidence. The scene felt surreal to him, but he couldn't deny the truth: he had severely underestimated the man he had spent the evening belittling. At the table, Elon leaned back in his chair, laughing at a story Michael had just shared. The two seemed like old friends, comfortable and at ease despite the spectacle their meeting had become. "Michael, you always have the best stories," Elon said, shaking his head. "I swear you could write a book." Michael chuckled, brushing off the compliment. "And you could market it to Mars, right?" The comment drew a genuine laugh from Elon, but their light-hearted banter was interrupted when Bradley approached, his forced smile faltering under the weight of his nerves. "Excuse me," Bradley began, his voice lacking its earlier arrogance. "Mr. Musk, Mr. Carter, I just wanted to." Elon raised a hand, silencing him with a look that carried both authority and curiosity. "Is this the gentleman you mentioned earlier?" he asked Michael, his tone even but pointed. Michael nodded, his calm demeanor intact. "It is. Bradley here was quite concerned about whether I met the standards of this establishment." Elon turned his full attention to Bradley, his expression unreadable. "Standards, you say?" Bradley stammered, words tumbling out in a messy attempt at an explanation. I didn't mean, it was a misunderstanding. "Let me stop you right there," Elon interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. "You judged a man based on his appearance. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a choice." The dining room grew silent, all eyes locked on the unfolding drama. Bradley's face burned crimson, and he struggled to meet Elon's piercing gaze. Michael stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Bradley, I'm not interested in hearing excuses. I've encountered enough people like you to know how this story ends. What matters now is how you move forward." Bradley swallowed hard, nodding, but his shame was palpable. I'm sorry," he said finally, though the words lacked conviction. Michael regarded him for a moment before nodding. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "But let this be a lesson. Every person you serve deserves the same respect, whether they're wearing designer shoes or ones that have walked 1,000 miles. Elon added, his voice now softer, but no less impactful. "Judging someone by their appearance limits your ability to grow. You never know who you're talking to or what they're capable of." Bradley nodded again, retreating quickly to the safety of the kitchen. The room, however, remained captivated by the interaction, and whispers began anew. As the evening progressed, the tension in the room eased, replaced by a growing sense of admiration for Michael. Some diners even took the opportunity to approach the table. Mr. Carter, an older man, said hesitantly, standing a few feet from the table. I just wanted to say that the way you handled yourself earlier was inspiring. It's a reminder we all need from time to time. Michael smiled warmly, shaking the man's hand. Thank you. It's not always easy, but dignity is something we owe ourselves. The man nodded, returning to his table, where his wife offered Michael a kind smile. Elon watched the exchange with a thoughtful expression before turning back to Michael. You've got a way with people, Elon said, leaning forward. That's why I wanted to meet here tonight. You don't just talk about change, you embody it. Michael shrugged modestly. Sometimes all it takes is being willing to stand your ground. The rest takes care of itself. Elon smiled. Well, you've got my full support. Let's talk details. The two delved into a discussion about their project, a collaborative venture aimed at bringing sustainable technology to underserved communities. It was clear that Michael wasn't just a guest at the restaurant, he was a key player in a movement much larger than the confines of that dining room. In the kitchen, Bradley slumped against the counter, staring at his reflection in a gleaming stainless steel appliance. His earlier arrogance had dissolved, leaving only a gnawing sense of regret. Sarah approached him, her expression softer now. Learn anything tonight, she asked, her tone gentler than before. Bradley sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, he admitted. I learned that I've got a lot to work on. Sarah smiled faintly. That's a start. Bradley watched through the small kitchen window as Michael and Elon continued their conversation, their laughter cutting through the tension that had dominated the room earlier. For the first time, Bradley realized what true class looked like, and it had nothing to do with appearances. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted entirely as Michael and Elon's presence continued to command attention. It was no longer the simple setting of upscale dining, it had transformed into a lesson playing out in real time, one that everyone in the room was privy to. Michael leaned forward, engaged in the discussion with Elon, their voices carrying just enough to make fragments audible. Scaling the operation is critical, Michael said, his tone confident. If we want sustainable energy solutions to reach these communities, we can't afford to treat this like a niche market. Elon nodded, scribbling something on a notepad he'd pulled from his pocket. Agreed. But we need the right partners, the right people. That's why you're here. I've seen what you've done on your own, and I want to amplify it. Their conversation wasn't just a meeting, it was a revelation for the diners who couldn't help but eavesdrop. Many had started the evening skeptical of Michael's presence. Now, they were witnessing a man who not only belonged but was clearly a trailblazer in his own right. Bradley, back in the kitchen, paced nervously. He couldn't shake the weight of Elon's words, you judged a man based on his appearance. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. I have to fix this, Bradley muttered, though the pit in his stomach told him it might be too late. He glanced at Sarah, who was watching him from across the kitchen. She gave him a pointed look that said, well, what are you waiting for? With a deep breath, Bradley smoothed his apron and stepped back into the dining room. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the unease of someone who had made a grave misstep and knew it. At the table, Michael noticed Bradley's hesitant approach but said nothing, his calm demeanor unchanged. Elon turned as well, his gaze piercing yet patient. Excuse me, Mr. Carter, Bradley began, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. He looked down at the table, unable to meet Michael's eyes. I wanted to. I need to apologize. Properly this time. Michael placed his napkin on the table, his movements deliberate. Go on. Bradley's hands clenched at his sides. I made a terrible assumption about you based on your appearance. That was wrong. It was unfair, and it doesn't reflect the standards I should have upheld here. Michael tilted his head, studying Bradley with a look that was neither forgiving nor condemning. Do you know why that matters? He asked softly. Bradley swallowed hard, shaking his head. Because it's not my place to judge. Michael nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. It's not just about judgment, Bradley. It's about what you lose when you limit someone to what you see on the surface. You didn't just disrespect me tonight, you disrespected yourself by assuming you knew my worth. The words landed like a stone in a still pond, their ripple effect evident in the way the room collectively seemed to hold its breath. Bradley nodded, his throat tightening. I understand. And I'm sorry. Michael held his gaze for a long moment before finally nodding. Apology accepted. But remember, the true apology is in what you do moving forward. Elon added, his voice firm yet encouraging, "You've got the opportunity to grow from this, Bradley. Don't waste it." As Bradley walked away, the tension that had gripped the room began to dissolve. Conversations resumed, but now they were tinged with a sense of introspection. Diners exchanged thoughtful glances, some murmuring words of approval, others clearly lost in their own reflections. Michael turned back to Elon, his smile returning. "Well, that was a first." Elon laughed. "You handled it better than I would have. But that's why you're you." Their conversation shifted back to business, their voices blending seamlessly into the buzz of the dining room. They spoke of logistics, partnerships, and the social impact of their upcoming projects, each word revealing Michael's depth of knowledge and Elon's respect for his insights. Meanwhile, Bradley retreated to a quiet corner of the kitchen, feeling both humbled and drained. Sarah joined him, handing him a glass of water. "You did the right thing," she said simply. Bradley nodded, but his face remained solemn. "It's not enough, though. I can't undo how I treated him." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, but you can make sure it doesn't happen again. And you can learn from it. That's what matters." Bradley sighed, looking through the small window into the dining room. Michael was smiling now, his posture relaxed as he and Elon continued their discussion. He seemed completely unbothered, as if the evening's earlier events hadn't fazed him. But Bradley knew better. He knew he had been part of something bigger, a lesson not just for himself but for everyone who had watched it unfold. By the time Michael and Elon finished their dinner, the energy in the restaurant had shifted entirely. As they rose to leave, the room grew quiet again, not out of discomfort but out of respect. Michael gave a polite nod to the diners who acknowledged him, his quiet dignity speaking volumes. At the entrance, the restaurant manager approached, his expression earnest. "Mr. Carter, Mr. Musk, I hope you'll come back again soon. On behalf of the staff, I'd like to apologize for any unpleasantness earlier this evening." Michael shook his hand. "Thank you. It's not about the mistakes we make, it's about what we do after." Elon added with a grin, "And besides, the food was great. We'll be back." As they stepped into the cool night air, Michael took a deep breath, a small smile playing on his lips. He glanced at Elon, who gave him an approving nod. "Ready to change the world?" Elon asked. Michael's smile widened. "Always." The restaurant doors swung shut behind Michael and Elon, leaving the diners to grapple with the conversation and confrontation they had just witnessed. Inside, the buzz of the evening was entirely different from how it had started. No longer was the focus on fancy meals or high-end ambience. The air was charged with reflection, curiosity, and subtle admiration for Michael's poise. In the kitchen, Bradley leaned against the counter, his posture slumped but his mind racing. The conversation with Michael replayed in his head on an endless loop. "You didn't just disrespect me tonight, you disrespected yourself by assuming you knew my worth." The words stung because they were true, and Bradley couldn't deny it any longer. "You good?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. She leaned against the counter next to him, her tone softer than usual. "I don't know," Bradley admitted. "I feel like I've been walking around blind and didn't even know it." Sarah smirked, nudging him gently. "Welcome to self-awareness. It sucks at first, but it's worth it." Bradley chuckled half-heartedly, running a hand through his hair. "What do I do now? It's not like I can undo what I said." "No," Sarah agreed, crossing her arms. "But you can do better. And you can start by not waiting for people like Michael to walk through the door to realize you've got some growing up to do." Bradley sighed but nodded. "Yeah, I need to work on that." Back in the dining area, the room was quieter now, the earlier commotion replaced by a subdued energy. A young couple seated near Michael's former table whispered to each other, their gazes thoughtful. "Do you think he always handles situations like that?" the man asked, his fork idly poking at his dessert. The woman nodded slowly. "Probably. You don't carry yourself like that without practice. It's inspiring, really." At another table, the older couple who had exchanged glances earlier sat in silence for a long moment before the woman spoke. "I've been guilty of it, too, she admitted softly. Judging people before I know them. Her husband sighed, leaning back in his chair. Haven't we all? The question is, what do we do about it now? Outside, Michael and Elon strolled toward a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The city lights glinted off the car's surface, their reflections dancing in the cool night air. Elon paused, turning to Michael with a thoughtful expression. You know, I was hoping for a productive dinner meeting, Elon said with a grin. But I think this evening turned into something bigger than either of us planned. Michael chuckled, shaking his head. It wasn't exactly on my agenda either, but sometimes life has its own plans. Elon nodded, his expression turning serious. You handled it perfectly, though. I've met a lot of people, Michael, and not many have your level of patience and grace. It's a rare thing. Michael shrugged, his modesty ever present. It's not about being perfect. It's about understanding that every moment is a chance to teach, whether someone's ready to learn or not. Elon smiled, clapping Michael on the shoulder. Well said. Now let's get to work. We've got a lot of teaching to do. Inside the restaurant, Bradley watched through the kitchen window as Michael and Elon stepped into the car and drove away. The sight left a strange feeling in his chest, something between regret and a spark of determination. For the first time, he felt a genuine desire to change, not because of the consequences, but because he realized he had been wrong. Turning to Sarah, he said, I think I'm going to ask the manager for some sensitivity training. Sarah raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at her lips. Look at you, taking responsibility. Who are you and what have you done with Bradley? He laughed, a genuine sound that felt like a small step forward. I'm just trying to do better. Starting now. As the restaurant returned to its usual hum, the night lingered in the minds of its patrons and staff alike. For some, it was a reminder of their own biases. For others, it was a lesson in resilience and dignity. For Bradley, it was the beginning of a journey he hadn't known he needed to take. And for Michael, as the cityscape stretched before him, it was just another step in a much larger mission. One that wasn't defined by shoes, appearances, or the judgment of others, but by the impact he left behind, one conversation at a time. The black car carrying Michael and Elon weaved through the city streets, its engine humming softly as the two men settled into their seats. Michael stared out the window, watching the lights blur together like an abstract painting. The earlier events played on a loop in his mind, but his focus was elsewhere on what lay ahead. Elon broke the silence, his voice cutting through the quiet. You know, Michael, this wasn't just a meeting tonight. What happened in that restaurant? It's going to stick with people. Not just Bradley, but everyone who watched it. Michael turned to face him, his expression thoughtful. I hope so. But moments like that are just the start. Real change happens when those moments push people to reflect and then act. Elon nodded. That's exactly why I wanted to work with you. You don't just talk about change, you live it. Michael smiled faintly. It's not always easy. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the hardest paths often lead to the most meaningful destinations. The car came to a smooth stop in front of a sleek office building. Elon stepped out first, gesturing for Michael to follow, ready to change the world. Michael chuckled, adjusting his blazer as he stepped out. Always. Back at the restaurant, the dining room had begun to clear out as the evening wound down. The staff moved swiftly to reset tables and tidy up, the earlier tension fading into the hum of routine. Yet for Bradley, the night was far from over. He lingered near the kitchen doors, his mind racing. The conversation with Michael had shifted something deep within him, but now he faced a daunting question: what's next? Still here, Sarah asked, approaching with a tray of empty glasses. Bradley nodded, his gaze distant. I can't stop thinking about what he said, about how I limited him and myself. Sarah placed the tray on the counter, crossing her arms. So what are you going to do about it? Bradley hesitated, then straightened his posture. I'm going to talk to the manager, apologize to the team, and I'm going to sign up for that sensitivity training I mentioned. Sarah raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Well, look at you. Mr. Redemption Arc. Bradley laughed lightly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. I have a lot to make up for, but it starts here. In the dining area, some of the remaining diners continued to talk about the evening. At one table, an older man leaned back in his chair, addressing his wife. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've caught myself making judgments like that before. Seeing someone and assuming I know their story." His wife nodded, sipping her coffee. "Maybe we all needed a reminder tonight. It's not just about what you see, it's about taking the time to understand." Across the room, a younger couple spoke in hushed tones. The woman gestured toward Michael's empty table, her voice tinged with admiration. He didn't just hold his ground, he made a statement without even trying to. That's what real class looks like. The man nodded, his expression contemplative. "Makes you wonder how many people you've overlooked or underestimated. Maybe it's time to start seeing things differently." As the restaurant emptied and the staff prepared to close, Bradley approached the manager. His nerves threatened to overtake him, but he pushed forward. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. The manager looked up, surprised but curious. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Bradley took a deep breath. "I owe you and the whole team an apology. Tonight, I let my assumptions get the better of me, and I disrespected a guest in a way that doesn't reflect our values. I'm sorry, and I want to do better." The manager studied him for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging your mistake is the first step. What are you planning to do next?" Bradley squared his shoulders. "I want to take sensitivity training, and I'm open to any feedback you or the team have for me. I know I have a lot to learn." The manager's expression softened. "That's a good start, Bradley. Keep at it." As Bradley walked away, a strange sense of relief washed over him. He wasn't proud of how the night had unfolded, but he was determined to make it the catalyst for lasting change. Outside, the city had grown quiet, its energy muted by the late hour. In the car, Michael leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. The events of the evening had tested his patience, but they had also reaffirmed his purpose. Elon glanced at him, his own expression reflective. "You know, I think tonight did more than just set the stage for our project. It reminded everyone in that room of something important." Michael nodded. "It's a lesson we all need, myself included. Never let the world define you by its limited perspective. Show them who you are." The car pulled away, blending into the flow of the city. For Michael, the night wasn't about a single victory. It was about the journey, the countless steps that led to real, meaningful progress. And as the city lights blurred past, he knew one thing for certain: his work was far from over, but the path ahead had never been clearer.